Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. This video is intended solely for simulation and analysis, and does not represent any real event or practical instruction. What happens when a navy loses the battle before most of its ships even leave the pier? At 9:37 local time, inside Iran's Bandar Abbas naval base, dozens of vessels were preparing to push toward the Strait of Hormuz. Sailors moved across decks, launch crews checked systems, and commanders believed they still had time to organize a response at sea. They did not. Far out in the Gulf of Oman and the Persian Gulf, American ships and submarines had already made their decision. That morning, the US Navy was not trying to delay the Iranian fleet. It was trying to sink it where it stood. The first wave came in low and fast. Tomahawk cruise missiles cut through the morning air, each one programmed the night before, with a route built around the harbor traffic pattern. They were not flying blind. Each missile had terrain data, radar altimeter references, and image-matching logic designed to bring it into the correct patch of water beside a specific target. That mattered because one mistake inside a crowded naval base could waste a weapon and leave a warship alive. On the Iranian destroyer Sahand, weapons consoles were still powering up. Crewmen had minutes to complete the sequence. Maybe less if they skipped self-checks. They never got the chance. At 9:55, the first strike landed. The camera feed washed white. Then the image returned to black smoke rolling over Sahand's berth, and secondary fire ripping across the dock faster than the morning wind could carry it away. The launchers never fired. The ship was already dying in place. But Sahand was only the first payment. A second Tomahawk was now descending on Sabalan, another Iranian warship still tied to the pier and still vulnerable. This one had a harder job. Smoke from the first strike was already drifting across the harbor, threatening to confuse the missile's terminal image matching. If the seeker saw the wrong shape, the weapon could choose a burning wreck instead of the still intact target beside it. For a few seconds, the strike package was in a race against its own smoke. Then the plume shifted. The target image cleared just enough. 93 seconds after the first impact, the second Tomahawk punched through Sabalan's berth area and tore into the ship. The old survivor of a previous war had finally run out of borrowed time. Two major combatants were now wrecks before either had truly entered the fight. And yet the morning had only just begun. 3 miles north of the burning destroyers, another threat was already waking up. The Iranian drone carrier, Shahid Bagheri, began launching Shahed drones as fast as crews could push them off the rails. Low, slow, and hard to detect cleanly, the drones lifted from the deck and turned toward the sea lanes, where American destroyers were operating farther offshore. That was the Iranian answer. If the surface fleet was being destroyed in harbor, then the war would move into the air. An E-2D Hawkeye picked up the launches first. 3 low-speed contacts appeared on the scope, barely larger than birds in radar terms, but moving with enough purpose to leave no doubt about what they were. Shaheds were airborne. American fighters were already moving north. 2F. A-18E Super Hornets from the carrier Air Wing were heading toward the threat, each carrying an AGM-158C LRASM under one wing. The drone problem was urgent. But the real target was still the ship launching them. That is what made the next minute so dangerous. The pilots had to split attention between the drones already in the air and the floating launch platform still producing more. The first pilot released his LRASM from high altitude. From that moment on, the weapon belonged to itself. It did not need constant updates. It did not need a pilot to hold its hand. It dropped, stabilized, descended toward wave-top height, and went hunting with passive sensors. Unlike older anti-ship missiles that announce themselves with radar emissions, LRASM listened instead of shouted. It searched for the electronic and physical behavior of a ship in the battle space and made its own decisions. That meant it could tolerate drift, confusion, and movement better than many older weapons. Meanwhile, the Shaheds kept coming. One Super Hornet pilot caught the first drone on infrared and fired a sidewinder. The missile found the weak heat signature and smashed the target out of the sky. His wingman used the gun on the second because a missile lock was not worth wasting in that geometry. The third drone went down seconds later. But farther south, the LRASM was nearing the final miles. Shahid Bagheri was still moving, still launching, still trying to turn a harbour disaster into a drone ambush at sea. Then the missile arrived. The first strike tore through the forward deck area and detonated inside the drone storage zone. The second came in moments later and hit a different section of the ship, breaking what the first blast had not. Within minutes, the so-called floating drone arsenal was no longer launching anything. It was sinking. Iran had tried to shift the battle from ships to drones. The Americans killed both at once. But Bandar Abbas was still not finished. Because farther east, one ship remained intact. And that ship still mattered. At Konarak, Iran's flagship Jamaran was still afloat, still armed, and still waiting for its first real exam against the US Navy. On paper, Jamaran was a symbol of modern Iranian naval ambition. State television had turned it into a national icon. It carried anti-ship missiles, air defenses, and the prestige of being the fleet's public face. But symbols do not survive on prestige alone. And the pilots coming toward Konarak could already see the next problem. Air defense radars were still alive around the port. That was not supposed to happen. The suppression package that should have silenced the surrounding guns had missed its timing and location. Now old Soviet-era anti-aircraft guns and supporting radar systems were awake and waiting. That changed the attack profile completely. The weapon available for the strike was an AGM-84 Slammer. It could hit the target accurately, but only if the pilot stayed involved through the terminal guidance phase. That meant he could not simply fire and turn away. He had to remain close enough to maintain control while flying near an active air defense zone. In other words, he had to operate like a surgeon while standing inside the enemy's kill box. The missile came off the rail cleanly. The pilot held his orbit high enough to stay above the gun ceiling, but close enough to preserve the data link. 5 miles from target, the nose camera activated. Now the pilot could see Jamaran through the seeker feed. Sailors were running on deck. Some of them were moving toward the launch rails. If they got there in time, the attack might turn into a missile exchange instead of an execution. The pilot aimed for the weakest place he could exploit quickly, the engineering section in the aft portion of the hull. He held the crosshairs steady. 3 miles. 2. 1. Then the Slam-ER drove into the target and detonated inside. The damage was catastrophic. Jamaran's back broke at the keel. The stern settled fast. Floodwater rushed through compromised compartments, and the flagship of Iran's navy began to sink into the mud of its own harbour. Its crew escaped through hatches already falling below the waterline. The symbolic heart of the fleet had not lasted a real fight. But the harbour still had one more problem. A large Iranian support ship named Macron was burning badly after earlier bomb damage, but it had not sunk. That made it more dangerous, not less. If its lines broke and it drifted free, it could become a massive floating fire inside one of the busiest anchorages in the Gulf. An American strike aircraft still had 2 bombs left. He also had a new problem. A mobile Tor M1 air defense battery had moved from its expected position and now locked him from between concrete warehouses. There were only seconds left before it could fire. His wingman did not wait for permission. He rolled in and dropped a 2,000-pound JDAM onto the tracked launcher. It was a crude solution in one sense, like crushing a wasp with a refrigerator, but it was the only fast answer available. The Tor crew fired first. The missile came off the rail, accelerating brutally toward the diving jet. The pilot broke hard at 7 Gs, and the missile screamed past close enough to shake the cockpit. 4 seconds later, the JDAM erased the battery. Now the lead pilot could finish Macron. His bombs hit low and deep. The ship took on floodwater, listed hard, and finally stopped pretending it could survive. Still, the harbour was disappearing under a black curtain of oil smoke. And somewhere behind that wall, more Iranian ships remained alive. The smoke from Macron changed the battlefield again. At 4,000 feet thick, it turned the inner harbor into a black chamber where sensors above the layer could no longer guarantee clean target identification. Somewhere under that smoke, the Iranian ships Zagros, Bandar, and Nagdi were still afloat. Nearby were the pens for Kilo-class submarines. If those boats got out, the Strait of Hormuz could become a far bigger problem for everyone. The pilot had two options. He could trust GPS and drop from above through the smoke. But Iranian jamming had already degraded navigation accuracy enough to make a miss very possible. A miss in open desert is one thing. A miss in a crowded harbor is another. The second option was far more dangerous. Drop below the smoke, see the ships directly, and release visually. That meant descending into the envelope of every shoulder-fired missile and every gun waiting on the shore. He chose the second option. At 5,000 feet, the smoke hit first. Not just visually, physically. Oil and burning chemicals worked their way into the cockpit environment and turned the entire harbor into a black tunnel. Then the gust shifted. For a moment, Bandar appeared. Then Zagros. Then the damaged line of another ship farther in. That was enough. He released in pairs. Zagros first. Bandar next. Nagdi last, into a section already destabilized by secondary damage and spreading fire. 6 flashes ripped through the smoke in sequence. Each one marked another hull taking on water where no ship ever wants to be hit, low, deep, and terminal. The harbor that had held Iran's Eastern Fleet was now becoming its graveyard. But the day was still not over. Some of the most dangerous vessels had already escaped. Fast attack craft from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had slipped into the Strait of Hormuz and hidden among merchant shipping. Each one carried anti-ship missiles and enough mobility to use civilian traffic as cover. This had always been part of the Iranian plan. If the fleet died in port, the strait itself would still become the battlefield. An MH-60 Romeo found the first group. 7 fast boats weaving between a large tanker and a container ship. That ruled out big weapons. The helicopter pilot used Hellfires, the one precision tool sharp enough to kill the boats without turning nearby commercial shipping into collateral wreckage. Several boats died in the first minutes. A P-8 Poseidon scanned the wider strait from above, sorting civilian hulls from hostile ones and feeding targets to the shooters. Farther out, Super Hornets dropped low for gun runs. At 6,000 rounds per minute, the Vulcan cannon does not ask much of fiberglass attack boats. By noon, more Iranian fast craft were burning, drifting, or sinking across the shipping lanes. Some still hid near islands and shallow water. But the first wave of resistance had been shattered. That was the real story of the morning. The United States had not merely hit a few ships. It had dismantled the Iranian naval response in layers. Destroyers at the pier. A drone carrier at launch. A flagship in harbor. A support ship before it drifted. 3 more warships under smoke. Then the missile boats in the strait itself. By midday, the fleet Iran expected to send into Hormuz had been reduced to wreckage, fire, and scattered survivors. And with that, the battle for the strait had already begun moving in only one direction. If you enjoyed this video, stay with us for the next one.